Hello everyone, welcome to Medieval India, chapter number 4. This is the class 12th NCERT, and we'll start with the new chapter, that is chapter number 4, Economic and Social Life, Education and Religious Beliefs, 800 to 1200. So, although we have not yet studied political developments in North India from 1000 to 1200, the entire period from 800 to 1200 may be regarded as one of the purpose of studying economic and social life and religious beliefs. Economic and social life, ideas and beliefs change much more slowly than political life. That is why many of the earlier features which existed before the 9th century continued during this period also. At the same time, there were a number of new factors which made a period different from the earlier one. Generally speaking, new elements as well as elements of continuity are found in every historical period, but the extent and direction of the change varies. Trade and commerce. In northern India, this period is considered as a period of stagnation and even of decline. The main reason for this was the setback to trade and commerce between the 7th and the 10th century. This in turn led to a decline of towns and town life in the region. The setback to trade and commerce was in part due to collapse in the West and the Roman Empire, with which India had flourishing and profitable trade. Gold and silver were never mined in India in any appreciable quantities. The wealth in gold and silver for which India was famous for was due to India's favorable foreign trade. The surplus coming back to the country in the shape of gold and silver. The rise of Islam leading to the collapse of old empires such as the Sassanid Iranian Empire also affected India's foreign trade, particularly the overland trade. As a result, there was a remarkable paucity of new gold coins in North India between the 8th and the 10th century. This situation gradually changed with the emergence of a powerful and extensive Arab Empire in West Asia and North Africa. The Arab empires included many of the areas in which gold was mined. The Arabs themselves were a seafaring people. The demand for Indian fabrics, incenses, and spices by the wealthy Arab rulers led to an increase of their trade with India and Southeast Asia, the latter being called the Spice Islands. As we have seen in the earlier chapter, many Arab travelers came to the western seaports during the 9th and the 10th centuries and have left useful accounts of the conditions existing in the country. As we shall see, trade between South India and the countries of Southeast Asia and China grew during this period. Foreign trade and commerce in the northern India began to revive gradually from the 10th century onwards. Malwa and Gujarat benefited most from the revival of this trade. Many new towns such as Champaner and Anilwara in Gujarat can be traced back to this period. During those days, India, including modern Pakistan and Bangladesh, had a much smaller population, less than 100 million, or about 1/10 of what it is now. A large part of the country was covered by forest infested by wild animals and inhabited by jungle tribes which were often warlike and plundered the travelers. The decline of internal trade led to languishing in North India of trade guilds called Shernis and Sanghas. The guilds had often consisted of people belonging to different castes. They had their own rules of conduct which the members were legally bound to obey and were entitled to lend or borrow money or receive endowments. With the decline of trade and commerce, these bodies lost their former importance. We find very few references during this period to guilds receiving endowments. In course of time, some of the older Shrenis emerged as subcastes. For example, the Dwadasa Shreni, which was a guild, became a subcaste of the Vaishyas. Jainism, which is patronized by mercantile sections, also received a setback. Decline in trade and commerce is also reflected in thinking of the period. In some of the Dharma Shastras, which were written during this period, a ban is put on travel beyond the areas where the munja grass does not grow or where the black gazette does not roam, that is, outside India. Travel across the salt seas was also considered polluting. Of course, not everybody took these bans seriously. We have accounts of Indian merchants, philosophers, medical men, and craftsmen visiting Baghdad and other Muslim towns in West Asia during this period. Perhaps the ban was meant for Brahmins only, or was meant to discourage too many Indians going to the areas dominated by Islam in the West and Buddhism in the East for the fear of their bringing back heretical religious ideas which may be embarrassing and unacceptable to the Brahmins and to the ruling groups. The ban on sea travel did not interfere with the growth of India's overseas trade with the countries of Southeast Asia and China. A brisk trade between South India and the countries of Southeast Asia had started from the 6th century onwards. The growing geographical knowledge about the countries of the area is reflected in the literature of that time. The peculiar features of the language of the area, their dresses, etc., are mentioned in the books of the period, such as Harisena's Brihatkatha Kosh. There are many stories about the adventures of Indian merchants in the magical waters of the area. Stories which became the basis of well-known story of Sindbad the Sailor. The great merchants were organized in guilds, the most famous of them being the Manigraman and Nana Desi, which had been active since early times. Many of the Indian traders settled down in these countries, and some of them even took wives from the local population. The priests followed the traders, and in this way, both Buddhist and Hindu religions ideas were introduced in the areas. The Buddhist temple of Borobudur in Java and Brahmanical temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia testify to the spread of both these religions there. Some of the ruling families of the area were semi-Hinduized, and they welcomed trade and cultural religions with India. In this way, Indian culture mingled with the local culture to establish a new literary and cultural forms. Some observers think that the material prosperity of Southeast Asian countries, the growth of civilization of large states, was based on the introduction of Indian technique of irrigated rice cultivation. The chief Indian port for sailing to Java, Sumatra, etc. was Tamaralipati in Bengal. In most of the stories of the period, merchants start for the Varnadvipa, modern Indonesia, of Kathaha, Kedah in Malay from Tamaralipati. A 14th century writer in Java speaks of people from Jamduvipa, India, Karnataka, South India, and God, Bengal, coming unceasingly in large numbers in large ships. Gujarat traders also took part in this trade. With the decline of the Roman Empire, China had become the main focus of trade in the Indian Ocean. The Chinese consumed enormous quantities of spices which were imported from Southeast Asia and India. They also imported ivory, the best of which came from Africa, and glassware which came from West Asia. To these were added medicinal herbs, lac, incense, and all types of rare things. Generally, products from Africa and West Asia did not go beyond the Malabar in South India, nor did Chinese ships go beyond the Moluccas in Southeast Asia. Thus, both India and Southeast Asia were important staging centers for trade between China and the countries of West Asia and Africa. Indian traders, especially the Tamil and Kalinga from modern Odisha and Bengal, played an active role in this trade. Along with Persians and later the Arabs, much of the trade to China was carried in Indian ships. The teak food of Malabar, Bengal and Burma providing the base of strong tradition of shipbuilding. The weather conditions were also such that it was not possible for a ship to sail straight from Middle East to China. The ships would have to wait for a long period in ports in between for favorable winds which blow from west to east before the monsoon and from east to west after the monsoon. Indian and Southeast Asian ports were preferred by merchants for this purpose. The main seaport for foreign trade in China during the period was Canton or Canfu, as the Arab travelers called it. Buddhist scholars went from India to China by the sea route. The Chinese chronicles tell us that the number of Indian monks in the Chinese court towards the close of the 10th and the beginning of 11th century was the highest in Chinese history. A Chinese account of slightly earlier period tells us that the Canton River was full of ships from India, Persia and Arabia. It says that the Canton itself, there were three Brahman temples in which Indian Brahmins resided. The presence of Indians in the Chinese Sea is testified by the Japanese records, which give the credit of introducing cotton into Japan to two Indians who were carried over to the country by black currents. Indian rulers, particularly the Pala and Sena rulers of Bengal and the Pallava and Chola rulers of South India, tried to encourage this trade by sending a series of embassies to Chinese emperors. The Chola ruler Rajendra I sent a naval expedition against Malaya and neighboring countries to overcome their interference in the trade with China. The embassy, sent to China by Rajendra I, travelled in an Indian ship. There is evidence to show that there were many shipyards in South India. Odisha and Bengal engaged in construction of ships. Such shipyards were also located on the west coast, including Gujarat. Thus, growth of India's foreign trade in the area was based on a strong naval tradition, including shipbuilding and a strong navy, and the skill and enterprise of its traders. The Chinese trade was very favorable to countries engaged in it. So much so that in the 13th century, the Chinese government tried to restrict the export of gold and silver from China. Indian ships gradually gave way to Arabs and Chinese, whose ships were bigger and were several stories high and carried 600 passengers apart from 400 soldiers. An important factor in growth of Chinese ships was the use of primitive mariner's compass, an invention which later traveled from China to the west. Already Indian science and technology were being left behind. Thus, while India's trade with the western areas declined, trade with Southeast Asia and China grew steadily till the 12th century. The lead in this trade was taken by South India and Bengal. This was an important factor in the wealth and prosperity of those areas. Thank you everyone for tuning in. In the next part, we'll start with the growth of feudalism. Do stay tuned and subscribe to the channel, and do share the videos if you liked it. Thank you everyone, and all the best for exams. See you next time.